the second part of the program, which is rebuttal and question and answer session. In this section, each speaker will have one 15-minute rebuttal and one 5-minute rebuttal. Those short rebuttals will be followed by any questions that you may have. The first rebuttalist will be Dr. Gish, followed by Dr. Nelson with 15 minutes, and then Dr. Gish with another 5 minutes, Dr. Nelson with another 5 minutes. So here is Dr. Gish with his 15-minute rebuttal speech.
First, I'd like to make a comment on Dr. Nelson's suggestion that most evolutionists believe in a creator. Well, it's a rather strange creator. It's a creator who created nothing. Creation is not the same as evolution. I assure you, ladies and gentlemen, they're two totally different things. Evolution, what Dr. Nelson believes in, is something that started with hydrogen gas. Hydrogen gas did it all. God didn't have anything to do with it. He may be out there somewhere, or who knows what, but he didn't do anything. Hydrogen gas did it. So you have a creator. He says he believes in a creator. What kind of a creator? What did this creator do? What did he do? I'd like to have Dr. Nelson answer that question. What did the creator do? If matter, if hydrogen gas, did it all. Now, he quoted a booklet from the National Academy of Science. It says creation is not science. Listen, let me tell you something. Neither creation nor evolution is a scientific theory. There were no human observers to the origin of the universe. There are no human observers to the origin of life. There are no human observers to the origin of a single living thing. Those things only happened once in the distant past. You can't go in the laboratory and repeat them. You can't do that. Science deals with the real world as it now exists, as it operates. We try to explain that. Creation and evolution are inferences based upon circumstantial evidence. And that circumstantial evidence tremendously supports creation. Now, to insist that our young people can't even have the privilege of hearing what you've heard tonight from this creation scientist, say that must be excluded because evolution is science, creation is religion. That's simply nonsense. One is creator, the other is no creator, and they're equally religious, and they're equally scientific or equally non-scientific. And to deny our students the privilege of hearing the scientific evidence for creation is sheer bigotry and a violation of academic and religious freedoms. And furthermore, who cares whether it's science or not? Is it true? That's the important thing. Did it really happen? You see, that's the important thing. Now, another thing, Dr. Nelson showed a so-called graph of the geomagnetic moment of the Earth. Ladies and gentlemen, that was not a graph of the magnetic moment of the Earth. You cannot determine a magnetic moment of the Earth. 2,000 years BC, there was nobody out there measuring the magnetic moment of the Earth. You cannot get the magnetic field of the Earth by measuring the magnetism in rocks. It's not done that way. The magnetic moment of the Earth has been determined since 1835 by setting these magnetic fields or magnetic instruments all over the Earth. You have to set up thousands of them because there's all this noise. And you have to take all of those determinations and you smooth out the noise, you eliminate the noise, and you determine the magnetic field of the Earth, and that's been determined since 1835. The graph that he showed you is not the magnetic moment of the Earth. That's sheer nonsense. What the graph of the magnetic moment of the Earth has shown since 1835, that it is steadily decreasing, exponentially. Dr. Barnes has pointed out, if this is true, if you go back 20,000 years, it's impossible. You can't go beyond that point. You'd have magnetic field would be so intense, the electrical current generating the magnetic field would be so high it just simply melt the Earth. And that's why he claims that the Earth cannot be older than 20,000 years. That's Dr. Barnes, a professor at the University of Texas, El Paso. That's his determination. Now, furthermore, Dr. Nelson showed some pictures of the so-called magnetic stripes, supposed to prove magnetic drift. It is a continental drift over hundreds of millions of years of time. How did they determine those magnetic anomalies? By towing a magnetometer just above the bottom of the ocean floor, measuring the magnetic anomalies in those surface rocks. But now, Dr. Nelson apparently is not aware of the fact that they have drilled down into the crust of the earth, and they brought up the cores so they can actually measure the magnetic properties of the rock in that core going down many meters, hundreds of meters down. And they found some very strange things. Here is an article by R.A. Kerr in Science, volume 205, that's 1983, beginning on page 1115. When they dug down into the crust of the ocean, brought out those cores, they found a very strange thing. The article says, quote, somewhat to the chagrin of paleomagneticians, when they examined the rocks recovered by the deep sea drilling project from the crust of the Atlantic Ocean, the magnetic stripes were nowhere to be found. The recovered rocks not only were too weakly magnetized to account for the observed stripes, but their direction of magnetization were sometimes wrong. They brought up this core and measured the direction of the magnetic field in the first 150 meters, pointed in that direction. Down underneath that it was pointed in that direction, and underneath it was pointed in that direction. It's supposed to be one single solid rock that if the direction of magnetization indicated the direction of the magnetic field of the earth, they'd all point in the same direction, point in three different directions. And so they're up a tree here. It's totally inconsistent with this idea of continental drift. And if this data had been available 20 years ago, the continental drift theory never would have got off the ground. The idea that these continents have been drifting for 150 million years, I believe, is based upon a massive amount of false data. What about dating? I didn't come here to argue on dating. He likes to argue about dating. He figures if he can prove the earth is old, that demolishes creation. That's just nonsense, ladies and gentlemen, because a lot of creationists do believe that the earth is old. As a matter of fact, the geological column was complete before Darwin, and it was constructed by geologists who were all creationists. It is immaterial. You can arrange things in a certain order, like a buggy, Model T Ford, Model A Ford, V8 Ford, and modern Ford. Now that's a true time sequence, we know that. But we also know the buggy did not evolve into a Model T Ford. The Model T did not evolve into Model A, and the Model A didn't evolve into a modern Ford. They were each separately engineered and created. So even if the geological column is correct, even if those things did appear on this earth in that order, absolutely no evidence that they evolved. There is no evidence. None of these transitional forms have been found to connect these things to one another. Now, as far as dating is concerned, but we have some problems with dating. I have to admit, my preference is for a young age for the earth. Because in these radiometric dating methods that he talked about, there's all kinds of assumptions. And we know that many times the assumptions cannot be correct. For example, here's an article. They dated a human skeleton. One method they used was amino acid racemization. They gave a date of 90,000 years. Then they used the uranium series isotope ratios. Gave dates of around 9,000 years. And the carbon-14 gave a date of around 4,000 years. All right, radiocarbon says 4,000. Uranium series says 9,000. And amino acid racemization says 70,000. Who's right? How can they be right when they all give these various dates? Furthermore, they dated rocks off the coast of Hawaii using potassium argon. Now, these rocks formed in 1800. They were only 170 years old when they were dated. They used potassium argon, gave dates of 160 million, and up to several billion years for rocks known to be only 200 years old. Something's wrong, you see, something's very wrong. And as a matter of fact, most dates are not accepted. They're simply thrown out. They just don't agree with your presumed age, so you just throw it out. Something went wrong, you see, this or that, and so forth and so on. Now, in some cases, the ages do agree, as Dr. Nelson mentioned. If you determine massive numbers of ages, sometimes you are going to get ages that agree. Say you determine one age by uranium lead, another age by potassium argon on the same rock. Maybe they do agree. Statistically, you would predict this. But most of the time, they do not agree, and they are simply thrown out. Now, what kind of science is this when we can pick and choose our data? Now, furthermore, there are many evidences for a young Earth, and I don't care. Look, I'll give Dr. Nelson his 5 billion years if he wants. I'll give him 20 billion years for the universe. That's okay. It's not nearly long enough. It would take billions of times longer than that to do what he says has happened from hydrogen gas. But nevertheless, there's many evidences for a young Earth. The amount of meteoritic dust that's come in onto the Earth has been measured and determined, and we don't have nearly enough meteoritic dust on this Earth, and certainly we can't find it on the moon. And comets can only exist for a few thousand years, and if the solar system is billions of years old, how come we still have comets? They should be all gone. Well, the evolutionist says there's some giant comet generator somewhere out there in the solar system. He never found that giant comet generator, but he has to suppose that. Otherwise, he'd have to admit that the solar system is very young, and he can't do that because evolution is dead, you see. The decay of the magnetic field of the Earth, determined by Dr. Barnes, indicates that things are much, much younger than billions of years. And furthermore, all galaxies occur in clusters. You look out into space, you never see a single galaxy. They all occur in clusters. Maybe a cluster of 6 or a cluster of 100 or a cluster of thousands. Astrophysicists can determine the rate at which those galaxies are moving away from each other. And they have determined, it depends upon the mass, total mass of the cluster and so forth, they determined that these galaxies should have dispersed. The cluster should have broken up. The cluster should have dispersed. Some within 1 million years, some within 4 million years, some within 25 million years, maybe up as many as 250 million years. But if the universe is 10 to 20 billion years, all of those clusters should have dispersed. There should be no clusters of galaxies. Ladies and gentlemen, that's all we do have, is clusters of galaxies. How then can the universe be billions of years old? Well, you see there's many arguments on both sides. I think the evidence is equivocal. I think you can argue both ways scientifically. But to say that they proved that the Earth is very old, no, they have not done any such thing. Now, about the fossil record. Dr. Nelson showed the so-called fossil record of plants and showed all those solid lines coming down, most of them down to a common ancestor. Ladies and gentlemen, that is just simply not true. Somebody drew that picture. But let me assure you, those things they are not connected to one another with fossils. Maybe you can connect them with a line on a picture, but they're not connected by fossils. Not only the angiosperm, not only flowering plants appear suddenly fully formed, but the gymnosperms, seed-bearing plants, appear the same way in all major plant kinds. I had a slide, I wished I had it in my projector, of an exhibit in the Chicago Museum of Natural History that showed all of these plants coming down to a central point, and you know what they had down there? The words unknown ancestors. All going back to unknown ancestors, and Dr. Nelson puts up a slide and shows them all coming back to a known ancestor. Now, who's right? The Chicago Museum of Natural History or this slide? I don't know where Dr. Nelson got it, but it is simply not according to the facts. Now, dinosaurs, Dr. Nelson showed a picture supposedly of a triceratops with one horn and little buds on the side. I don't know where he got it. I have an encyclopedia on dinosaurs, and I looked all through that book. I couldn't find any such thing. Oh, yes. They said they had a fossil of a triceratops, which they now think was a juvenile. Somebody thought was an intermediate form. They had another fossil of a triceratops they thought might be a transitional form. They decided it was a pathological case. Pathological, juvenile, but no true intermediates. No, there are no such things. They either have horns or they don't have horns, and they don't have any little thing in between. And that picture showing the evolution of the ceratopsian, putting protoceratops down on the bottom, and then monoclonius and triceratops, and putting all those lines, listen, those are just lines on paper. You can't find any intermediates between protoceratops and the monoclonius or the triceratops. Protoceratops has absolutely no horns at all. Nothing. And monoclonius has one complete horn, and triceratops has 3 complete horns, and to put them in a series like that and say that's evolution, well, that's just telling stories, as Dr. Patterson said. It's not true to the fact. There are no intermediate, no transitional form. Now, what about this horse to whale? Dr. Nelson infers that something like a horse may have evolved into a whale. Well, maybe that might be happen. Let's see. May we have the projector quickly? Turn on the projector, somebody. and I'm going to have to go through these. No, I'm sorry. My tray has to be put in. Can we have another minute or two while we do this? I don't want to lose my time because I do want to show something. You'll have to put my tray in there. What tray do you have in there? I want to show a picture, suggested picture of a cow changing into a whale, because evolution suggested that it's possibly something like a cow, a pig, or a buffalo evolved into whales. Now, will you turn that around? Will you turn that around until we have slide number 32 in place? Slide number 32. All right, now that's slide number 32. Picture of a marine reptile. We have fossils of marine reptiles, fossils of land reptiles, but nothing in between. I lost a minute, and I want to use this other minute. A friend of mine, now, based upon the suggestions of evolutionists that a cow, a pig, or a buffalo may have evolved into a whale, he sat down with an artist and tried to visualize what these intermediates may have looked like. Can we turn out these lights? Is it possible? Well, we see a cow venturing into the water, and over eons of time it is said that the tail changed into flukes, the hind leg disappeared, and the front leg changed into flippers, and we ended up with a whale. Now, isn't that something? And I suppose if we had a failure here, we just call it an utter failure. Well, now listen. You can't even imagine what those intermediates may have looked like. A whale is highly and marvelously designed for life in the water. And to imagine that something like a pig, cow, or a buffalo, or a horse, or something like that ventured in the water and evolved into a whale is just simply preposterous, and we see that is true of all real examples. There is no evidence to support it. Thank you, and I'll be back.
The next rebuttal will be presented by Dr. Nelson.
Thank you. Let's review the debate to make clear that we know what Dr. Gish is arguing and where the discussion is going. He didn't really provide you with any evidence that the universe is less than 10,000 years old. He said, gee, you can quibble with some of the dates. He didn't say that, you'll remember the quote from his institute that says that the dates really are old and in the right order. And if you go over and check with the physics department, that's what they'll find you tell you too, or the geology department. He presented nothing showing that there had been a global flood or the geological column had been formed that way. He presented nothing showing that all kinds had been created simultaneously. He did nothing to show that the transitions are transitions, except instead of that lovely skull I showed you of a transition, he presents a cartoon that's sort of utterly ridiculous, right? And cartoons don't substitute for fossil bones, you know? What evidence did he show you that the variation produced by genetic variation, such as in pigeons and the kinds of things we see with developmental shifts, gene duplications and symbiosis can't account for many more times the evolutionary plasticity than we need? None. That the processes which he agreed produced the Hawaiian honey creepers with a great diversity of beaks are not adequate to account for evolution? None. Why hasn't he done this? Because there's no scientific evidence that really supports it. Now, if you have some residual doubt about the technical issues, I've got some volunteers here from the faculty who you can go around and check with. You can go see Dr. Clark, Robert Clark in biology, Dr. Dwight Spencer over in biology, Dr. Galen Newfield, who's chairman of biology, or Paul Johnson or Tom Bridge in geology. So if you have some doubt about that, then you may want to go see them. However, there are a couple of points where Dr. Gish seems particularly confused that probably are worth addressing. I was most amazed that Dr. Gish was still arguing on the probability of enzymes forming, and how unlikely that was, his lovely comment about running around and looking for electrons. There, of course, a long history in science of people doing calculations as to what's impossible instead of looking at the data. So for example, when they first took specimens of bumblebees back to Europe, people calculated that it was impossible for them to fly. And there's nothing like looking at some data to show that the calculations are wrong. Now the false assumption that Dr. Gish is making here is that enzymes have to be in their fully involved form in order to work before you can get enzymatic activity. But there are a couple of kinds of experiments that disprove that. For example, Dr. Miller did the classic experiment in which he showed if you just take simple gases and put them together with an energy source, you take ammonia and methane and hydrogen and put them together and run an electric spark through them, then you'll get amino acids and sugars out of it. Now Dr. Gish says, gee, how can you do this randomly? Well, it turns out you don't do it randomly, you do it with the laws of chemistry. And Dr. Gish has the laws of science confused with randomness. And indeed, this reaction is so replicable that it doesn't really matter what mixture of gases you use, as long as it's hydrogen-rich, not oxygen-rich. Then you will get amino acids and sugars formed. And indeed, you get a predominance of the same kinds of amino acids, but both isomers, but the same kinds that are common in life itself. Now, if you keep that experiment running, those amino acids, which are trapped in water, will end up forming themselves into chains, right, so that you'll get peptides. Right? And if you keep running the experiment, you end up with little droplets that are osmotically reactive, have in terms of their surface properties enzymatic activity themselves. Now there's another experiment done that's a little less natural by Dr. Fox, but it shows how far the organizing properties of matter will go. Now notice these are all in accord with the second law of thermodynamics because they happen. If they were impossible, they wouldn't happen. What you can do is you can take some amino acids, take a mixture of amino acids, heat it to 300 degrees and splash some salt water on it. You will then get millions of little droplets surrounded by a coat of polymerized amino acids. Now these things, if you change the salt concentration in the water, they will swell or shrink. That is, they're osmotically reactive, as are living cells. If you put more polypeptides in the solution, they will grow. If you keep feeding them polypeptides, the surface gets bigger and bigger, and they will pinch in two by surface tension, a physical process. They will grow if fed and pinch in two. They also have recently been shown in the March issue of Bioscience that if you shine a light on them, they acquire an electrical charge on the inside versus the outside, just like a living cell. Right? They have a membrane potential, it's called, when in the presence of light. That was a surprise. We didn't know you could get that much organization. The real relevance, however, comes when you consider Dr. Gish's argument about the probability of getting even one enzyme. You remember? It's so small you'd never have it happen. But in fact, when you do this experiment, you get several kinds of enzymatic activity from those polypeptides that are repeatable. That is, you have multiple copies of protein chain, of amino acid chains, that is, they're built like proteins, with enzymatic activity, and you can do this in 3 hours in a high school chemistry lab. Now note 2 or 3 things. One, this isn't the origin of life. It's 3 hours of finding out what properties are inherent in proteins when polymerized. And it turns out that there's a lot more lifelike properties inherent in those than Dr. Gish would like. Indeed, it turns out that multiple kinds, that is several kinds of different enzymatic activity are found in these crude proteins that aren't impossible because you can form them in replicates in the lab. The second point that I'm amazed on is that Dr. Gish keeps confusing the second law of thermodynamics. He seems to think that the formation of things like starting with a cloud of hydrogen and going to helium and more complex nuclei, or a cloud of hydrogen and going to stars and galaxies, is contrary to the second law of thermodynamics. It makes you wonder who he thinks does things like figure out how you make nuclei and how you make stars. They're physicists, you know, not biologists. And you might have a suspicion that physicists knew how to apply the second law of thermodynamics. And there's no physicist who thinks that the formation from a hydrogen cloud up to complex elements like iron is against the second law of thermodynamics. There's no physicist who thinks that taking a cloud of hydrogen, forming a star out of it, is against the second law of thermodynamics. What Dr. Gish tries to do is to confuse you by saying order and make you think that the second law precludes forming a structure that is ordered. What the second law precludes is forming a system that is more ordered. But let's take just the first step from hydrogen. Right? Well, from hydrogen, the next step in order is helium. You take 4 hydrogen molecules, you put them together, and you get a helium molecule that's slightly lighter. Now the question is, and more organized, it's got more things in the nucleus, more ordered by Dr. Gish's criterion. The question is, what happens to the system when you do that? Right? Does the system within which that's occurring become more ordered or less ordered? Right? Well, that's the reaction that drives the hydrogen bomb. Right? And in forming a little bit of helium, you produce a great big explosion and a whole lot of disorder. The system goes to disorder. Right? Now, Dr. Gish says, gee, these evolutionists are crazy. They think that hydrogen somehow organizes itself into stars. No, hydrogen doesn't organize itself into stars. Gravity organizes hydrogen into stars. Now, Dr. Gish and I would agree that we don't know where the law of gravitation came from, unless you want to rely on a religious explanation. But given the origin of the universe, then you've got gravitation, you have the forces of nuclear reactions that build nuclei, you have the forces of chemical interactions that build amino acids, you have the forces of chemical interactions that build amino acid chains. You have the scientific processes that work instead of randomness. He has gravity confused with randomness. He has thermonuclear reactions confused with randomness. He's got a whole bunch of science confused with randomness. Now, if you really want something that's contrary to the second law of thermodynamics, you can look at the geological record and ask how to interpret it in terms of flood. For example, there are the Green River shales in Wyoming. You can find these discussed in Creation Evolution, an article by Weber. They have between 5 and 8 million pairs of layers of the kind we get in lakes that don't have oxygen in the bottom, in which you have a dark layer and a light layer. Now these layers are made out of very fine sediments, and they vary in width in 11.5-year cycles, like we find for sunspot cycle variation, and in 1,200-year cycles like we find for polar wobble. So if they weren't formed slowly, somebody really is trying to fool us again. But they couldn't have been formed in the flood, because you can't within a year move back and forth 5 million masses of water without shuffling the thing underneath. That's a formation that's contrary to the second law of thermodynamics if you try to interpret it according to flood geology. That is, there are lots of features in the geological record which are totally totally impossible by the second law of thermodynamics. So what the second law of thermodynamics precludes is Dr. Gish's form of quick creation. And it supports, as you would suspect, since the physicists support an old age, it supports evolution. Dr. Gish has also said, gee, how about transitions? Well, let's look at some more transitions. Give me the slides there if we can. Kill the lights if it's at all possible. And let's see, I get time to, while I wander around and get this organized, I get an extra minute, right? This is the fossil Lucy that Dr. Gish was talking about. Lucy is a mosaic. That is to say, Afarensis is Lucy. If you look at her leg and pelvis versus an ape's leg and pelvis, it's essentially fully human. That is, when you look at Australopithecus, the skeleton is one of an organism that stood upright. These are the fossil tracks found by Mary Leakey of Australopithecus afarensis, and the tracks are of a foot like yours or mine, but a little smaller, without any handprints or knuckle dragging. So that we even have the fossil tracks. Now, Dr. Gish likes to say there aren't any intermediates. Well, if you look at the jaws, the skull of Lucy is about halfway between an ape and a human. So that if you look there, the canine tooth, the big eye tooth, is very large in the chimpanzee. It's smaller in Lucy, and it's indistinguishable from the incisors, essentially, in humans. You'll also notice that the gap is intermediate, and you'll also notice that the general shape of the dental arcade, which is parallel sides over there, U-shaped in humans, is intermediate in Lucy. So that when you look at the fossil evidence, you remember Dr. Gish was citing the conclusions of someone who'd never even looked at the evidence. When you look at the evidence, you have clear examples of transition. In short, Dr. Gish has still not offered you any evidence which would support you in believing in a young universe, that would support you in believing in a flood as a major cause of the geological record, that would support you in believing that all the species were created at once. Indeed, he's not advocated much beyond simple progressive creation, and as this shows, his arguments that the gaps are real, that there aren't transitions, is simply false. Perhaps the saddest part of Dr. Gish's position is that it loses the glory and power of science. That is, there's a lot of glory in hello somebody, in a view of the universe that starts out billions of years ago with enough natural laws already in existence to form you out of the dust of stars. That is, what science shows is that it's possible for you to be formed out of the dust of stars by a set of natural laws, not by a set of random processes, but by a set of natural laws acting on them. And I'll end with a quote from Darwin. Darwin said, he closes the origin of species this way: "There's a grandeur in this view of life, with its several powers having been originally breathed by the Creator into a few forms or one. And that whilst this planet has gone on cycling according to the fixed law of gravity, from so simple a beginning, endless forms, most beautiful and most wonderful, have been and are being evolved." Thank you.
The final rebuttals will now be given. First rebuttal, 5-minute rebuttal, will be given by Dr. Gish.
Ladies and gentlemen, these debates are just tremendously frustrating, because I'd like to have another hour to offer a proper rebuttal to some of this stuff that we've heard here tonight, and I've just have 5 minutes. But I'll do the best I can. Now, Dr. Nelson said that Archaeopteryx had the same kind of teeth that reptiles had. He hasn't been reading the recent scientific literature, because the authors have recently shown that they do not have teeth like reptiles at all. They do not have a reptile-like skull. They have a bird-like skull. They have dug the skull out of the limestone of the London specimen and showed that it is bird-like, not reptile-like as they had thought. Furthermore, another scientist said that the pelvis is bird-like, not reptile-like. The wings have the basic pattern and proportion of the modern avian wing. It has a furcula or wishbone. Nothing has a wishbone except birds. And it has the ankle of birds. Every feature, practically every feature in Archaeopteryx can be found in some modern bird. Archaeopteryx is not like a reptile or a dinosaur. Have you ever seen a reptile? You just stick a bunch of feathers in it and kick it in the tail and it'd fly? Why, of course, there's nothing like that. It had wings, it had the wishbone, it had the structure of a bird, and it was a bird, and evolutionists desperately needing transitional forms try to convert it into a transitional form. Dr. Nelson cites pigeons. Of course you can derive a tremendous variety of pigeons from one single wild pigeon. That shows that God created a genetic variability within each kind, so that each kind could adapt to various environments and conditions and survive. But one thing, you start with a pigeon, you always end up with a pigeon. You can breed chickens to lay more eggs, but you can never breed a chicken to lay cylindrical eggs. There's always a limit with which you cannot go beyond that. Artificial selection shows that there's a limit beyond which no further change is possible. And all of these artificially selected creatures are less viable than the wild bird or wild animal. They will not survive in the wild. They survive only because we take care of them. The second law of thermodynamics, Dr. Nelson admitted that you cannot have an increase in complexity of a system. What is the universe if it isn't a system? Do you mean to tell me our universe with 1 billion galaxies and 1 billion stars in every galaxy, concentration of matter, 100 billion times 100 billion concentrations of matter, with our complex solar system and millions of living things on this earth are not more complex than hydrogen gas? The idea that hydrogen gas converted itself into the present universe, in spite of the second law, is a violation of the second law. There's no question about it. Well, he suggests maybe down here you can have an increase in complexity at the expense of another portion of the universe, which is complex. This gives up its complexity in order to create evolution down here. All right? Let's assume that it can happen. It can't happen. You've got to couple it in some way, which there's no coupling. I mean, you just get raw energy from the sun. That's not going to do anything. That's going to destroy. That's not going to create something. But supposing it could happen. Supposing you can use an ordered portion of the universe to create order down here. Let me ask you a question. Where did the order and the complexity of this portion of the universe come from? How can you account for that? Well, maybe it came from some other portion of the universe. Well, where did that come from? Where did this come from? You know what they do? They go around in endless circles and never answer the question, where did that complexity, where did that structure, where did that organization come from in the first place? They never answer that question. Nobody has ever answered the question because there's no answer, ladies and gentlemen. The second law of thermodynamics is an insuperable barrier to evolution, and they try every way they can to get around it, and it's ridiculous. Now, he talks about the Stanley Miller experiment. That's been thrown out years and years ago. People know now that the Earth never had methane and ammonia and hydrogen in its atmosphere. That's been thrown out. But all Miller got was a few simple amino acids, incorporating a trap in his apparatus. He had to have a trap there to trap out the product, otherwise it gets destroyed at rates millions of times greater than which it forms. You would never get any amino acids under any plausible primitive Earth conditions, or an organic chemist can do it, but it would never happen on the primitive Earth. That's all you get. Now he says amino acids and sugars. You don't get amino acids and sugars, you get amino acids in this. What if you got both amino acids and sugars? One destroys the other. They cannot coexist. And furthermore, they do not polymerize to form peptides or proteins. That does not happen. Nothing like that happens spontaneously at all. The experiments of Fox are the worst pseudoscience that ever been published in the history of science, and I wished I had time to critique it. Ladies and gentlemen, we've run out of time. Let me close by saying this. There is two sides to this question of origins. As a matter of fact, I'm convinced through my research and studies, it's now gone for many years, that this theory of evolution is absolutely scientifically untenable. It's just telling stories of one kind and another. The laws of science, the laws of probability, the fossil record, genetics, and all of the sciences combine to demand an origin of this universe from the outside, a supernatural origin. I repeat, the best scientific statement we can make about our origins is still, in the beginning, God created. Thank you very much.
The final rebuttal will be given by Dr. Nelson. This will be followed by an alternate question and answer session.
Dr. Gish is confused again. You remember I agreed at the beginning that the debate was not about whether in the beginning God. I would like to answer, in closing, one more question that he says he's never got an answer to. He says he's never got an answer to where does the order come from to drive the synthesis of molecules and the formation of galaxies. This comes from the fact that he still has no apparent inkling of what it means to have thermodynamic order. Because it's in fact true that if you go over to the physicists and ask them to calculate the thermodynamic order of the universe, they will tell you that it has more thermodynamic order after the Big Bang than it has at any moment since then. And what he's doing is confusing the human concept of order, which is very loose and doesn't take account of the heat dissipated in the system, with a physicist's concept of thermodynamic order. And you can go check that with any physicist, any astrophysicist will tell you that indeed the order comes from the Big Bang. All right, now where did the Big Bang come from? In the beginning, God is fine with science, because there's nothing in science that we can say before the Big Bang. All right. As you've seen tonight, things have not been going very well for the special creationists lately. In the Arkansas case, Dr. Gish's group has recognized for years that their case can't stand intensive scrutiny, and so they have advised against court tests or making laws about spatial creation. The lawmakers in Arkansas proceeded anyway, and so that you got a test of judicial review of his theory, of the theory he puts in the textbooks for the children. And the conclusion, as the bishops and ministers had asked, was that that's not science, it's religion, and that it's unconstitutional to mandate that it be taught. I don't have any objections to In the Beginning God being taught in school. I just don't think it belongs in a science class, because it doesn't deal with scientific processes. But if you want to put it in a class in comparative philosophy, that's perfectly fine. It's also true that most Christians who are scientists have rejected most of Dr. Gish's points. The Journal of the American Scientific Affiliation is full of them. A book that you may want to look up is by Dwayne Thurman, a professor at Oral Roberts University, who's written one on how to look at evolution and other Bible science controversies. And he's labeled Dr. Gish's position the most dogmatic and least scientific of the various religious options. And he lists several others that accept much more science, that also believe in an inerrant Bible and in a literal Bible. In the school textbook situation, it's been going equally bad. Texas has recently repealed their rule that if you taught evolution, you had to teach spatial creation. And New York has said that you can't use texts in science classes that talk about spatial creation. Most of the major scientific societies have explicitly rejected creation is not science, concluding with the National Academy of Sciences. And Dr. Gish himself, indeed, has retreated. As you saw tonight, he's not defending, he's not offering you evidence, discussing evidence that supports a young universe. He's not discussing evidence that supports flood geology. He's not discussing evidence that supports all the species being created at once. He's arguing as a progressive creationist. What he's saying is that the origin of life is unlikely and that the gaps are real. But in fact, as you saw, he's wrong, clearly wrong on both points. That is, the case for spatial creation is so blatantly non-existent that even Dr. Gish will not defend it in public. Thank you.
Before I start fielding questions, I think we should again recognize these two gentlemen for their fine work tonight. I will field questions at this time. I'm going to ask that the speakers limit their answers to a couple of minutes, and then I'll give the other gentleman a chance to respond to the answer if he wishes. I'll begin with a question for Dr. Gish.
Predictions are what we can call a giant age, which then went into a big bang, leading to a universe which is expanding for roughly several billions of years, roughly equivalent to the universe. First, a big bang, if it exists, should have a shock wave, which could still be heard. When searched for, the shock wave is found. This was given by the Nobel Prize a few years ago. Why did the mathematics work so well, showing that there's a big bang if there wasn't?
Would you repeat the question, please?
Well, the question had to do with the mathematical verification of the Big Bang Theory.
Through what?
Well, it was through the
Background
detection
radiation?
of a shock wave.
Background radiation.
What's that?
The 3 degree Kelvin background radiation, is that what you're talking about?
No, the wave of shock, the background wave of the shock wave was based on the Nobel Prize in the
Yeah.
Bell Lab a few years ago.
As I understand it, the question is this. Based upon prediction of the Big Bang, you'd predict that there was at least a whimper left. Some background radiation would be left. And they looked out in space, and very unexpectedly, they weren't looking for it, it was very accidental, they found what is called a 3 degree Kelvin background radiation. Convert that radiation to temperature and be about 3 degrees absolute. That's supposed to be the whisper left over from the Big Bang and the fulfilled prediction of the Big Bang. Now, that is a possibility, certainly. However, there are some very well-known physicists. Hannes Alfvén, for example, University of California at San Diego, is a Nobel Prize-winning physicist. And he said that you could have that background radiation without any hot Big Bang at all. There could be other models of the formation of the universe which would not start with a Big Bang, and you could end up with this background radiation. There are other ways to account for that background radiation. The dust within the universe absorbed radiation, that would from the stars, and then re-radiated. That amount that might account for this background radiation. Now, furthermore, if you have the Big Bang, you have matter and radiation radiating out into space. You come to a time very shortly after the Big Bang when radiation decouples from matter. And then the radiation continues to move at the speed of light. Obviously, the matter doesn't move at the speed of light. It's much slower than the speed of light. Radiation continues to move at the speed of light. What would happen to that radiation? It would move right on out of the universe. How would it get back to us? How is this background radiation supposed to be radiated back to us? If the radiation moves at the speed of light, matter obviously does not move at the speed of light. The radiation would outrun the matter and would go right on out, would never come back. Well, you know what they suggest? That the universe has a perfect reflecting surface, and it's reflecting that radiation back. Now, they just pull that assumption right out of the air. If the radiation is a product of the Big Bang, why doesn't it just keep going and just go right on out there? How does it get back to us so we can see it?
Dr. Nelson?
It's probably true that there are some alternative theories. It's also true that none of them that I know of offer any hope or consolation for people of Dr. Gish's view. It's interesting that the speed of light, he thinks the speed of light from the Big Bang should have disappeared, while he knows that the speed of light from galaxies that formed very early in the history of the universe is still getting here. And of course the light gets here, not having necessarily to reflect off the outside of the universe, but rather from having filled the universe and coming to us just like the light We start with in the beginning God. We go out and we ask what evidence God left in creation itself. And as you know, people used to read the Bible and say the earth can't go around the sun. And they used to read the Bible and say that the earth is not round. Right, so there's a different major theological school to which most of the bishops and ministers I mentioned would subscribe, which says that the proper way to find out what the Bible means about creation itself is to look at creation.
Well, of course, if we're discussing the Bible here, and I don't suppose we came here to discuss the Bible, but I think we all agree the Bible doesn't talk about evolution. It talks about creation and mentions some very things that are absolutely incompatible with the theory of evolution. And so we're certainly not talking about the Bible when we talk about evolution. Now, what Dr. Nelson is saying, we just don't take the Bible literally, and a lot of people don't. I understand that. And they say that the scientists, up to the scientists to discover how all of this happened. All right, let's assume that that is the case. But the scientific evidence does not agree with the thesis of evolution. Matter, look now, matter does not have a tendency to go from disorder to order, from simple to complex. Matter doesn't do that. We don't see that happening. And it ought to if evolution is true. That's the way God created. If he just endowed hydrogen gas with the ability to evolve and to go to higher and higher levels of organization, we ought to look at hydrogen gas right now and see that ability of hydrogen gas to do that. And it doesn't do that. You know, if you had a cloud of hydrogen gas and it began to collapse on itself to form a star, it begins to heat up and it gets hot. Now you have two forces at work. You have gravitational pulling in, gas pressure pushing out. Gas pressure is vastly greater than the gravitational pull. You'll never get a star by any natural process.
Question for Dr. Gish.
I'd like to hear Dr. Gish's side of the story about the Arkansas court case.
The question concerns the trial in Arkansas. I was not involved in that trial. At least I was not a witness. I was there during the entire trial. Let me say this, that the whole trial was a waste of time. That judge had a mindset that was 100% in agreement with the ACLU, the American Civil Liberties Union. Creation is religion, evolution is science, that settles the matter. Now, as long as you have a judge with that sort of prejudice and bias, then it's just a waste of time. Our only hope someday is to get a judge who's objective, who can listen to the evidence. The trial in Louisiana, which will be taking place probably next year, we have the finest legal team in the United States to defend the law in Louisiana, which simply says that when the evidence for origins are discussed in public schools, both the evidence for creation and the evidence for evolution should be presented evenly, fairly, objectively, and I think that's an excellent idea. We have a team of lawyers to defend it that is very skillful, very knowledgeable, and I think they'll do a tremendous job. And nothing is going to get settled until this gets to the Supreme Court. And then it will be settled. Now listen, I insist that science deals with the here and now. That is a scientific theory. There's no scientific theory about origins, evolution or creation. And to insist that we teach our kids only evolution is simply insisting that you teach your particular brand of religion under the guise of science. Evolutionists do not object to teaching religion in the schools as long as it's their religion. That's okay. Well, I don't want to teach any kind of religion in schools. I want to teach the scientific evidence. And to teach one exclusively is teaching a philosophy.
Dr. Gish seems to think that the judge was prejudiced in Arkansas. Since there was only one judge, it's difficult to have someone who's totally unbiased. I presume he thinks the entire U.S. National Academy of Sciences is also prejudiced, since they've reached the same conclusion, namely that his views are religion and not science, and that they should not be taught in the public schools, at least as science. The problem, of course, is that once you've got views that are not scientific, then there are an infinite number that could be taught in science classes. We could talk about the people who, you can just pick a whole array of theories. We don't actually talk about origins in the sense of before the Big Bang in science classes. One of the reasons that we haven't talked about young Earth in science classes is that in science classes, fairly taught, the same thing happens to young Earth ideas that I showed you tonight. That is, students who are taught young Earth ideas will see those ideas shot down so fast as to conflict with their religion. So we tend not to directly do those in science classes because they're such terrible signs that it endangers the faith of students. In fact, the reason I'm here tonight is because I've had lots of students, there must be tens of thousands of students who have come from backgrounds in which they have been taught by people who didn't understand science the tenets that Dr. Gish advances. When they get to college, they find out that the evidence is overwhelmingly against that view, and they end up coming around and saying, is it possible to believe in religion and science at the same time? Because the evidence neutrally presented is so overwhelmingly against Dr. Gish's position as to present a major threat to religion. That's why the bishops and the ministers opposed the law in Arkansas. Not because they're worried about bad science, they let us worry about it, but because the science so overwhelmingly rejects Dr. Gish's model as to constitute a threat to religious belief.
Question for Dr. Nelson.
Yes, sir. If indeed we are, all we have here is a result of the hydrodynamics and natural laws set in order, say by God, would you explain to me how the sense of sight developed and evolved in this natural processes?
What evolved? What was it? What? Explain what
The
evolved.
question is, how did the sense of sight evolve from natural
Oh,
processes?
eyes.
Sorry. You'll remember that I said a while ago that if you just take the amino acids, they're reactive to light. You put them around a thing of water, salt water, and you get an electrical charge in reaction to light. What you then have, if you look at the invertebrates, is a series of receptor organs, all of which are responsive to light, all of which function well, but which form a graded series of complexity. So that you have organisms which depend simply on the response of the protoplasm to sense light. You have organisms that have a bare nerve without any other structure that serves as a light sensor. You have organisms that have a bare nerve and a pigment spot which increases the sensitivity to light. You have organisms that have several nerves and a pigment layer. You have several nerves arranged around a cup-like structure without a lens. You have several nerves arranged around a cup-like structure with a pigment layer and with a fixed jelly-like lens. You have eyes with simple muscles, and so you have a whole series of how the sense of sight evolved, existing, starting with these protein things that you can make in the lab, up through looking at the comparative morphology of invertebrates.
Well, there's an awful lot of holes in that story. Let's begin with the vertebrate eye. The vertebrate eye appears immediately fully formed. There's no transitional forms. There's nothing to give us any idea where the vertebrate eye comes from. The eyes in fishes, amphibians, reptiles, man, very similar. Immediately, there it is, fully formed. The same is true of the squid. The squid is an invertebrate, but it has an eye practically identical to the vertebrate eye. Now, the squid and the vertebrate eye had to evolve from an ancestor which had no eyes. So we have to believe that a bunch of accidents, mistakes, genetic mistakes, not only generated our eyes, did it once, as improbable as that is, but it did it twice. It evolved the squid eye too. but they all appear immediately. Now, furthermore, in invertebrates, well, there's no series showing a gradual increase in complexity of the eye. As a matter of fact, some invertebrates, which are supposed to be the most advanced, has the most primitive eyes. And creatures that are supposed to be the most primitive have the most advanced eyes. There's a trilobite, for example, they suggested became extinct 200 million years ago. They're able to study the eyes of those trilobites because their lens was composed of calcite, inorganic crystalline calcium carbonate. The lens are still there. They studied the eyes of those trilobites, and they were absolutely astounded to discover they had perfect, undistorted vision. And those eyes appear immediately fully formed. Some trilobites don't even have eyes. They don't need eyes. Some have eyes and some don't, but those that have eyes have perfect eyes, perfect undistorted vision immediately. The idea that an eye with its complexity and everything has to be there for that eye to function, that it evolved gradually through some intermediate, is just simply scientifically untenable, and it doesn't fit the facts.
A question for Dr. Gish.
Earlier in your lecture this evening, we're going to rails.
As I understand your question is this, I mentioned the fact, according to Dr. Barnes, his views on, and the data from the magnetic field, if you went back 20,000 years, the Earth would simply have been melted. What is the basis for that statement? Well, there's two possible ways to account for the magnetic field of the Earth. One is a self-generating dynamo. That is the view of evolutionists. It's a terrible theory. It's absolutely physically impossible, but it's the only thing they got. A self-generating dynamo. The Earth whirls around, the molten material whirls around, and somehow that magnetically charged material generates a magnetic field. The trouble is, you can't have a simple rotation. You've got to have something rotating up here, something up there, something down here, something there, and so forth and so on. Terrible. Now, Dr. Barnes says the magnetic field is not generated that way at all. It's generated from the fact that electrical current is actually circulating in the core of the Earth. Now, as predicted, that electrical current would decay. It meets resistance, it generates heat, so it runs down. And indeed, the magnetic field, now the electrical current generates a magnetic field. And it is running down. When it gets down to zero, it's just going to be zero. That's all. It can't reverse itself. When the energy's gone, the energy's gone. Now, Dr. Barnes points out the fact that this magnetic field decays with a half-life of 1,400 years. Go back 1,400 years, it's double what it is to now. Go back 2,800 years, it's quadruple what it is now. Go back another 1,400 years, it would be 8 times, and then 16, then 32. Now, as you go further and further back, you get a larger and larger magnetic field. You've got to have a higher and higher current, and you get more and more heat. If you go back 20,000 years, you get back to the point where the magnetic field would be so great, the electrical current would be so hot, it would generate enough heat to melt the Earth. Go back 1,000,000 years, and it just simply vaporized the Earth. And it's good physics, it fits the facts, and that's his suggestion.
The question was whether there was a contradiction between granting an old age to the universe and Dr. Barnes' theory. There certainly is. The fact that his theory becomes, Dr. Gish has just done a reduction to absurdity of the theory, probably has something to do with the fact that he's about the only geophysicist who believes it.
Question for Dr. Nelson.
Evolution took billions of years to happen. How come it's not happening today? We still have apes.
We still have what? Apes?
Lower part of it.
Good. The question is, if evolution took billions of years to happen, how come it's not happening today and we still have apes? The answer is that evolution occurs by branching, as well as by one species evolving directly into another. The reason we still have apes, and in fact most evolution occurs, obviously if you started with only a few kinds or one kind of organism, you would now end up with many kinds. For example, in the Hawaiian honey creepers that we looked at, that Dr. Gish agrees is a case of evolution, we still have forms like the primitive ones, as well as forms like the advanced ones. Right? That is, the bush diversifies, the apes survive in the forest, and humans apparently evolved and survived in the plains by niche diversification.
Evolutionists believe that some millions of years ago there was a common ancestor of ape and man. Now they've never found that common ancestor. They're still looking for him. He's hypothetical. Then some of these creatures got isolated over here somewhere, and they began an independent evolutionary line leading down to man. Some others got isolated over here, and they began another evolutionary line leading down to apes. Now, I must confess, I don't have the foggiest notion where you can start with a single population, go off in such diametrically different directions, end up with man in one case and the ape in the other. To me, it just defies any scientific rationale. That's what evolutionists believe. And so they say that's why apes are still around today. Man did not come from a chimpanzee or an orang or a gorilla. The gorilla, the orang, and the chimpanzee and man came from a common ancestor. I repeat, they haven't found the common ancestor. And how can you explain that things go off in such different directions, starting with exactly the same creature? Now, furthermore, you know, bacteria ought to they ought to evolve extremely rapidly. They reproduce in just minutes. We have bacteria and algae living today, which they say are practically identical to fossil algae and bacteria they found in the fossil record, which they say are about 3 billion years old. In 3 billion years, the algae is still the same that it is today, and the bacteria is the same as it is today, according to their calculations and their proclamations. Why has the bacteria remained a bacteria and algae remain the same the same algae it is today? How come it's done that for 3 billion years? Doesn't seem very reasonable.
Question for Dr. Gish?
Dr. Gish, Dr. Nelson says you are confused about the second law of thermodynamics. Prove you wrong.
I certainly would. I'd be glad to. Thank you very much. That's simply nonsense, ladies and gentlemen. I'll ask that question again. I'll ask some questions again. If the natural processes and natural laws now operating are destroying the universe, all order and structure and information within it, and if these natural laws are all there is and all there ever has been, how could they have created the universe in the first place? How can you take the very same processes that are destroying the universe and use them to create it? I'd like to know the answer to that question. Furthermore, I want to know the answer to the question, if you say a portion of the universe up here can generate order down here, where did the order come from up here? I'd like to know the answer to that. Furthermore, there's no question the second law applies to an isolated system. In Dr. Nelson's view, the universe is an isolated system. The second law of thermodynamics does apply to an isolated system. The second law says that such a system must become less ordered, more random, with time, never the reverse. And yet he starts with an explosion and goes to the present universe and tries to tell us that hydrogen gas converted itself to the present universe, which is clearly a violation of the second law of thermodynamics. Now, I want to know where we're wrong. I want to know how come we don't understand the second law of thermodynamics. Now, surely you can take the air in this room and separate it into nitrogen, oxygen, and carbon dioxide without violating the second law of thermodynamics. Of course you can do that, if you build a plant and put the machinery in it to do that. What the second law of thermodynamics says, it will never happen spontaneously and naturally. You'll never get that. If you take oxygen, nitrogen, and carbon dioxide, they will mix and scatter around. Never go in the reverse direction. Well, you can do it, but you have to build a plant to do it. You have to have the machinery. You have to have the mechanism. That's what you didn't have in the primordial universe, in the primordial earth. There weren't any machines there. There was no photosynthesis. There were no living thing. There were no systems there. Just that raw, destructive energy, a bull in a china shop pouring down on the earth and supposed to create amino acid proteins and DNA. Ladies and gentlemen, that is just absolute pure nonsense. It would never happen in billions times billions of years.
Dr. Nelson?
Dr. Gish remains confused about the second law of thermodynamics. I've been trying this slowly. I didn't say the universe created itself. I never said the universe created itself. His first question was how. If you started with hydrogen gas and got here, how did the universe create itself? And he said he never got an answer to that. Well, he won't get an answer from science to how the universe created itself. I don't think science has an answer to that question. I don't think anybody else thinks science has an answer to that question. It is simply true that the physicists say that if you start out with very, very high temperature, high density radiation in a Big Bang explosion, that has more thermodynamic order than what we have now. Dr. Gish confuses to use his primitive idea of order and confound it with the physicist's idea of thermodynamic order. It's like temperature, you know? Temperature is not exactly a measure of how hot things are. If you go out to your car on a cold morning and you touch wood and styrofoam and sheep skin, they will feel like they're at different temperatures. So your primitive feeling of how hot things are is not equivalent to the scientific word temperature. The scientific word temperature has to do with how fast the molecules are vibrating, not with how cold it feels. Dr. Gish's sense of order is equivalent to your sense of whether something feels hot or cold. It's a pre-scientific concept of order. It's not the concept that physicists use in doing thermodynamics. He simply got the two confused.
Question for Dr. Nelson in the back.
If evolution is true, we have the facts, we have the evidence. You said tonight we have professors in here that can back you up, stand with you as far as physics and everything. Why are evolutionists so willing to promote this from college age down? We had to go to Indiana to get somebody to debate Dr. Gish.
Well, it is true that Dr. Gish prefers to debate people who haven't heard him debate before. No, just a second, I'll answer the question. The question is, why did he have to go to Indiana to get somebody to debate Dr. Gish? The answer is that Dr. Gish has been doing his song and dance, now just a second, for hundreds of times, and it takes a little practice to get acquainted with the kind of nonsense that he's going to lay out.
Ladies and gentlemen, I think if that's the best answer Dr. Nelson could give. He hasn't given an answer. Now listen, here at Emporia State University, as is true of practically every other university in the United States, evolution is taught as an established fact. It's taught day in and day out, year in and year out. They have courses on evolution. People have been teaching it. They ought to be ready in a moment to get up and defend the theory of evolution scientifically against a scientific challenge. That ought to be true. There should be no hesitancy to do that. Certainly you shouldn't have to go to Indiana University. I debated back in Lynchburg, Virginia, under the sponsorship of Jerry Falwell at Lynchburg Baptist College. He offered people all over the United States $5,000 in expenses to come and debate. And it took him months to find someone, and he finally had to pay Dr. Russell Doolittle at the University of California in San Diego $5,000 and pay his expenses to get him there to do it. Why wouldn't somebody just jump up and in a moment blow the creationists right out of the hall? If they've got all the evidence and we have none, then they ought to just blow us right out of the hall. And you know what? Now, I'm not saying this. I've never made a claim I've won any debate. But the evolutionists said a few years ago, at that time there'd been 90 debates between creationists and evolutionists, and they said the creationists had won every one. Now, I'm not boasting. I don't claim I've ever won a debate. I won't claim I won this debate tonight. But that's what the evolutionists said. If they've got all the evidence and we have none, and we just present nothing but scientific evidence, how come is it the creationists, at least at that time, had won every debate? Well, I tell you, the evolutionists must be incredibly stupid, and the creationists must be incredibly clever to be able to overcome something like that and win a debate, just even to win one debate. No, I don't think that's it at all. Now, I'll tell you my frank opinion. We have the truth on our side. And that makes a whale of a difference. And I'll tell you something, the evolutionists cannot change the laws of science, and they cannot generate those non-existent transitional forms. They can't do it.
I would prefer to field any future questions on the nature of the debate topic, which had to do with the scientific evidence, rather than the debate participants themselves. A question for Dr. Gish.
I'd like to hear Dr. Nelson is, I realize it's only a few minutes. Dr. Nelson mentioned a couple times the geologic columns
Yes.
in relation to flood geology.
Yes.
And I would like to hear you respond to
Yes.
geologic columns in their order
Right.
in relation
Yes.
to flood geology.
Yes. The geological column is the arrangement of which the sedimentary deposits have been arranged. Now, nowhere on the earth do you find the geological column. You find a piece of it here, a piece of it there, a piece over there. If you had it all together, it'd be 130 miles high. And they arrange these layers mainly according to the fossils that they contain. If you find a certain sedimentary deposit with a particular kind of trilobite, it doesn't make any difference whether it's on the bottom, whether it's on the top, it doesn't make any difference how it's dated, you call it Cambrian. It's Cambrian rock because it contains a particular kind of trilobite. So automatically you put that down on the bottom and you arrange it in that order. Now, in many places, things are out of order. Many places, something that's supposed to be old is sitting on something that's supposed to be young, and they suggest maybe there was an overthrust. You raise up this portion of the earth, thrust it over here, erode away the younger ones on top, leaving the old sitting on the young. The trouble with that is, many places you see no evidence of overthrusting. And so this geological column may not be as sacrosanct as it's supposed to be. However, there are other ways of explaining it. Now, of course, if things did occur in that order, then that's fine. Some creationists believe that. All of evolutionists believe it. But there are other ways to explain it. If you did have a worldwide flood, let's say, and I think there's tremendous evidence for the actual existence of a worldwide flood. Continent-wide shales and sandstones and limestones, the Tibetan Plateau, 750,000 square miles of sedimentary deposit, 3 miles high, 200,000 square miles, the Colorado Plateau, massive fossil graveyards on an unprecedented scale. You never get anything like that today. I think is evidence for the flood. How is the geological column explained on that basis? On the basis of ecological zone, geographical distribution, a minor contribution to mobility, and other factors, a combination of factors, may have distributed the fossils in that order. Now, evolutionists poke fun at that. But they resort to similar arguments in many cases. Not a general overall model, but they do refer in many cases to something like that. Dr. Morris, in his book, The Genesis Flood, has said that that geological column could be accounted for by something of that nature. The flood water is overwhelming. The Cambrian animals are bottom feeders. They would be buried first, obviously. And the amphibians are at the water-land boundary and so forth. Now, there's a lot of problems with that. I admit that. Of course there is. But there's a lot of problems with the evolutionary view, too. A tremendous problem. Now, if I can make one last comment. Evolutionists have suggested that the major geological features on Mars were formed by massive flooding. But they would deny that the Grand Canyon or any other geological features were formed by massive flooding on the Earth. The Earth has 350 million cubic miles of water. Mars does not have one drop of water. But they'll believe there was a massive flood up there, but they will deny there ever was a massive flood down here. I don't know. I don't follow that sort of logic.
Well, the question was, what did Dr. Gish think about it? And that was what he thought about it. However, comment on a couple of the points. One, in fact, there are parts of the geological record that we account for by fairly large flooding. For example, the Great Scablands in the northwestern United States are accounted for by flooding when a natural dam broke and flooded hundreds of square miles and put up massive flood features. So his statement that there's none of it that we account for by flooding is again simply reflects an insufficient mastery of geology. When you go to the ecological explanation, the reason I picked Swamp Oaks is he says the amphibians ran up the hill. The Swamp Oaks had to run up the hill with them for his explanation to work. And I pointed out earlier that the second law of thermodynamics precludes the formation in a year of the kinds of deposits that you have. Logic prohibits piling one coral reef that took hundreds or thousands of years to grow on top of another coral reef, on top of another coral reef, on top of another coral reef, and then stacking them. Not in a random order, but in an order from bacterial reefs to bacterial plus algal reefs without any invertebrates, to primitive corals, middle corals, and advanced corals as you go up the geological column. The record clearly speaks massively against a flood. Flood geology is simply impossible given the nature of what we know about the geological record. Any other statement is simply wishful thinking and not science.
Let me field one more question for each speaker. First, one more for Dr. Nelson.
I appreciate the study that's gone into this evening, and I appreciate you both coming here. My motivation for coming is truth and learning. In the interest of that, and respect for that truth, we all need to take an honest and open look at many points as possible. Taking the subject at hand, creation versus evolution, how much of the Bible have you read?
Substantial parts, but not the whole thing, including certainly all of Genesis, and a lot more than that. I went through a traditional Methodist Sunday school and read a lot of the Bible to do that. Though, in fact, by the ground rules that Dr. Gish insists on, we're not supposed to be discussing that.
In the interest of study, we all need to study both sides. Creation comes from the Bible, evolution comes from science. I would suggest that you read Deuteronomy 30 once you go.
All right.
One more question for Dr. Gish.
That was not a technical question by your own ground rules. I think you have two more questions.
Well, we can have another question for Dr. Nelson. That'd be fine. Let's have another question for Dr. Nelson. Gentlemen. Is that all right, Mr. Moderator, Mr. DePoe? Okay.
Dr. Nelson, in one of your slides, you showed slight variation in pigeons, but you showed no transformation or definite change. Could you tell us why?
I don't understand the question. Those are derived by families of pigeons.
But the pigeon was still a pigeon. There was no change.
Yes, the point of the slide was, in a sense, the pigeon's still a pigeon, except it starts looking like a partridge, right? And so the question is, when does a pigeon quit being a pigeon? I have no objections to calling those pigeons. The point I made with the slide was that there's a great deal of variation within natural kinds or within a species.
Well, of course, the creationist recognizes that fact. As a matter of fact, if God had created each individual species, each individual within a species genetically identical, they'd be unable to adapt to different environments, different conditions, and would rapidly probably become extinct. So he created each kind with a genetic variability. And so we can go to a wild pigeon, and man doing the selecting can select these genetic factors which he sees, and he keeps crossing them, and he gets these varieties of pigeon. Sure you can do that. You started with beets in 1800, selecting for a higher sugar content. By 1873, they had the sugar beet, 17% sugar. They've never been able to go beyond 17%. That's the maximum. You've reached a limit. And they're still beets. And as I said, you always have a limit here. And selecting pigeons, you see, merely demonstrates what was there originally. There's no evolution. All of those genes for the different varieties of pigeons were there in that wild population. They're all there. Well, even man, if you take two people, black and white, that is a correct genetic mix now. You can't have a white man and a black woman, or two black people or two white people. You take two people of the correct genetic mix for skin color, one single couple could theoretically produce 16 children, one which is pure black, one which is pure white, and 14 children of various shades in between. That can be done easily. Fact is, I have a picture with me of an English couple. The man was white. A white Englishman married a woman who was the daughter of a black Nigerian father and a white English mother. They had twin boys. They were fraternal twins. They were not identical twins. Obviously, they were fraternal twins. One had white skin, blue eyes, and blonde hair. The other had dark skin, dark hair, and dark eyes. Immediately. You see, that's easy to understand genetically if you have the proper genetic mix to start with.
Young lady there in the white.
We're talking about branching across trees. We found that we can specialize and perfect the beet, the wheat. We can get a better working animal by crossing a horse, donkey, and deer. Yet when we do this, we find that the mule has sterile animals. We cannot go beyond a certain species of the wheat plant and cross it with barley, I'm correct. You can't cross it with corn and come up with different types of. Just like you cannot take a dog and a cat and come up with what Dr. referred to as a DAF last time. What I think we have in this branching, which obviously shows we're taking a lesser, a lower animal, lower plant, and not which kingdom we're talking about, and perfect it, will cause it to be better as taking two of the genetic things that are better in a grain of wheat that you want to be able to produce, producing higher nutritional values. Take those two and breed into a higher and better wheat plant. Why can't you do that with two different species of animals, come up with a better animal that you can produce? Why are these various species having separation where you can no longer crossbreed and end up with sterile animals such as the wolves?
I guess that question's supposed to be for me, so I'll try to answer it first. Yes, there are fertility barriers, definite fertility barriers between different kinds. And most species, there is a fertility barrier. We don't understand the mechanism. We don't know why it's there, but it is there. Now, of course, we believe in created kinds, that there are fertility barriers that prevent the kinds from mixing. Each kind is separate and distinct. Now, when you have varieties within a kind, like varieties of wheat, you can select the varieties to try to get wheat with a higher protein content, something like that, or corn with a better quality of protein. Yes, that can be done. You get many varieties, but they all, as you say, they remain wheat or they remain corn. As a matter of fact, when you do all of this selection and you get this inbreeding, you get strains that have poor viability. So what do? You cross those strains and you get a hybrid. Now that you get hybrid vigor from that, because they're no longer so bred out, you see. And so the more specialized you get, the less viable you get, the less fertile. As a matter of fact, if you can keep selecting flies for certain characteristic, finally the fly dies out. It becomes sterile. So there are these fertility barriers that does prevent these crosses, and because each kind, I believe, is separately created, and there are these fertility barriers that have been established. Yes, you can breed closely related varieties, but not a cat with a dog or something like that.
The question is, why are there fertility barriers? And the answer is that there are usually fertility barriers because the species have diverged sufficiently that the gene pools will no longer interact. Wheat turns out to be an interesting example because wheat is in fact a hybrid between two species of grass whose hybrid is sterile. So you don't get any way to continue the line except that the chromosome number in the hybrid doubled, which is a common occurrence in plants, restoring fertility and allowing us to continue artificial evolution. So that in some cases, particularly when the sterility is chromosomal, and most easily in plants, those fertility barriers are disrupted by somatic doubling of the chromosomes, allowing things to continue to evolve. People who study plant chromosomes have argued that this has been a basic process in plant evolution, that you produce hybrids, double the number of chromosomes, and then gradually rearrange the genetic systems, and then rehybridize and double again. That's rare in animals because animals tend not to make their gametes from the somatic tissues. If you were to make gametes out of your liver cells have 6 sets of chromosomes instead of 2, so you would produce highly complex gametes. But basically, the answer to your question is that we don't expect a continuous gradient of infertility under a hypothesis from evolution because the branchings were a very long time ago and the genetic systems have become sufficiently different that they can no longer make a viable organism. The simplest example I know of that is there are 2 species of fish which you can't hybridize because one of them has a tail grows straight, another one has a longer tail, and it grows around the egg in a circle. You hybridize them and the tail tries to grow where there's no groove for the tail to grow, so when it hatches it has no tail. And so it takes sometimes only a very simple genetic change to create these. That being the last question, I'd like to thank the organizers of this for a pleasant evening. I'd like to thank you all for being a pleasant audience.
Thank you. Get 'em on.